Hey everyone, this is Mike from Comic Book Trove, here today with another Omnibus review. And today I'm going to take a look at the Thanos Wars Infinity Origin Omnibus. Now this book came out a few years ago now, I think probably about 3 or 4 years ago. 3.5 maybe, I don't really know. But something like that. And it features the earliest stories by Jim Starlin featuring Thanos. So the title is maybe a little bit unclear if you're not in the know. And to be honest, that probably applies to many of these Infinity stories. These cosmic stories all tend to throw the word Infinity in there when it comes to Marvel. So it's not necessarily clear as to where and when these stories take place in the continuity. But this is the earliest stuff. So this is like where you want to start from if you're going back to the beginning and you want to see Thanos' first appearance and his earliest stories. That's what you get in here. The book, I think, is likely out of print now. I don't know 100%, but I think it could well be. But nevertheless, you know, as I've said before, some of these out of print books, Marvel, you know, have been getting better and better at bringing things back into print. And, you know, hopefully we're at a point now where we don't need to go years and years between books going out of print and coming back into print. So, yeah, you never know when it might come back around. The cover here, this was a standard variant. This was by In-hyuk Lee. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Apologies if I'm wrong. Pretty cool piece of artwork done, I think, specifically for this omnibus. There was a DM variant cover option as well, which is actually this image down here, Avengers Annual 7, featuring that floaty Thanos head in the stars. I really like the spine on here though, so I like the colouring for this Thanos Wars Infinity Origin. Looks really cool. I like that. And down here, you got your Thanos head and the 6 Infinity Gems, which make their first appearance in the material in here as well. And of course, Jim Starlin's name being the main creator, as he both writes and draws a lot of this material. Now, when this book came out, I remember that it caused quite a bit of confusion online as to what exactly this was, because to the untrained eye, this content down here, which you can take a look through there if you're interested in it. It looks like a kind of random compilation of different parts of different series thrown in a random issue here and there, and it just doesn't necessarily look like it's going to be collecting things in a, I don't know, in a complete way. But nevertheless, it is in fact very comprehensive, and this is all presented in a perfect reading order to follow, basically to follow Thanos' story from his first appearance in Iron Man issue 55, going through the first story where he clashes a lot with Captain Marvel and the Avengers, and then the second story arc, which features a lot of Adam Warlock, and then the Avengers again. Yeah, it's a really cool story, and this is really the stuff that all happened before Infinity Gauntlet. So that's, you know, the big early 90s event. Thanos had been absent from comics for quite a while before he appeared in the lead up to that. And this is what he'd first appeared in all this stuff. So the hardcover itself has this nice design on it. You get the kind of space theme, the Infinity Gems again there. The spine is pretty much the same, but minus the colouring on the title. And the back is, you know, blank, just with those kind of stars. But it's a nice design, I like it. Let's take a look inside then and flick through. So, as I mentioned, Jim Starlin, really the main guy here, who we're going to see the work of in both writing and artwork. And of course, years later, when he was writing the Infinity Gauntlet story, Infinity War, Infinity Crusade, and all that, he didn't do any of the artwork for those, or he might have done a little bit of the artwork in between the events, but he stuck to mainly writing at that point. But back in these original stories, he was doing a bit of everything. So he was doing some writing, doing some artwork. And we start off here with issue 55, The Invincible Iron Man. So this is both the first appearance of Drax the Destroyer, who we get here on this opening splash page. Very different version of the character to the one that we've seen in more recent years in the MCU movies, Guardians of the Galaxy. The original Drax the Destroyer was pretty much created as a warrior specifically to fight Thanos. Like, that was his sole objective, really. But then also, of course, in this issue, we also get the first appearance of Thanos, who looks very different here in this first appearance to how we would see him looking a bit later on, or at least, maybe not very different, but noticeably different. He's quite a bit slimmer. His face looks a bit pudgy. Is that the right word? I don't know. Just doesn't quite look right. I know that behind the scenes, Roy Thomas stepped in and kind of told Starlin to, I think in his words, or the words that I've seen used most commonly, beef him up, just make him bigger, make him look more sinister, menacing. And luckily that did happen. But then after that, so we jump into Captain Marvel issue 25. So this was where Jim Starlin came onto this book, working with Mike Friedrich as a scripter initially. And at this point in time, you've got Captain Marvel. This is the original Captain Marvel, the Kree warrior Mar-Vell, who has this odd kind of partnership with Rick Jones, where they have to switch places to come into the world, and whilst one of them's here, the other one's in the negative zone, and vice versa. Quite a strange relationship, but these are cool stories and some excellent artwork, I've got to say, throughout all of this from Jim Starlin, who, not so much in these issues, but more so later on, his artwork kind of really reminds me a lot of Jim Steranko's very experimental style. In fact, this is the sort of thing, to be honest, already. This sort of stuff. It's just sort of that kind of non-conventional artwork, you know, utilising the page in different ways, not being stuck to the kind of rigid panel format, which obviously we see that sometimes, but it's nice to see things done in a little bit more of a unique and unusual way. But yeah, so we've got the introduction of Thanos then inside these other stories, and the reason that it's kind of going all over the place, why you've got issues of Captain Marvel and Avengers and Adam Warlock and Strange Tales and all sorts, is just simply because Thanos didn't have his own series, you know? So Jim Starlin was kind of taking Thanos with him as he moved across and did work on all these different stories. He was telling the story in whatever issues he was able to tell it in, pretty much. He was making the most of it as and when he could. Another really cool page here. It's quite experimental stuff, you know, I think very much in that Steranko vein, as I say. In the first story, Thanos becomes fixated on the cosmic cube, as we see here. The cosmic cube had previously appeared in issues of Captain America. The Red Skull had used it for quite a while. There was an extended story arc in the, I think, late 60s or early 70s, where the Red Skull was using that, and it's basically a cube-shaped wishing machine kind of thing. Magical object which the holder can basically wish anything into reality. So naturally that's the kind of thing that appeals to Thanos and his quest to become all-powerful. And his quest to impress the Lady Death, who is his kind of consort, I suppose. And he's got a fixation and a love affair with death. You know, that's very much central to Thanos and the classic stories through this era, and then, of course, through Infinity Gauntlet. He loves death. You know, he wants to impress her and make her love him back, and she never does, and it kind of infuriates him. So he tries harder and harder and does more and more extreme things to kill people, to cause suffering, and in his mind, hopefully, you know, please her in doing so. So he's kind of got two objectives. He wants to become more, you know, increasingly powerful. He's a little bit simplistic, perhaps, in these early stories. He's not quite as fully rounded as he would go on to become in later years. But I think he's a cool villain and a cool concept, even from early on. And like I said, Jim Starlin just, you know, some great artwork, but presenting some great ideas as well throughout these stories. And this is mainly kind of two key story arcs collected in here. So it's like it culminates in two big showdowns with Thanos. So there's the first one that comes at the end of all this Captain Marvel stuff, when the Avengers get involved. And then there's the second one at the end of the Adam Warlock stuff. But some really cool artwork in here, like some of the best artwork probably from 70s comics, for sure, I think, in my opinion. And as I say, this is all the setup to Infinity Gauntlet. So if you've got the Infinity Gauntlet Omnibus or the box set or trades or whatever else it's collected in, you may know that later on Thanos was revived in Silver Surfer, I think issue 34, when Jim Starlin went on to that book. And when he did that and he told that story and he built up to the Infinity Gauntlet event, that was the first time Thanos had been in comics at all since the end of the material collected in here, and that was about a 12-year gap, roughly, I think. Because this goes up to the late 70s, and I'm pretty sure it was 1988 or 89 when Starlin took over Silver Surfer and brought Thanos back into the fray. But yeah, so this is all the early stuff, and really well worth checking out for that background on Thanos, and as well as a lot of other these characters, because it's not just Thanos who Starlin introduced here. You know, he really took the reins with Adam Warlock. Although he didn't create Adam Warlock, he, I think, reinvented the character quite significantly. I think most people would probably agree. There's Adam Warlock pre-Jim Starlin and Adam Warlock post-Jim Starlin, you know, and that's really two different characters. But you get a lot of other characters like Pip the Troll very soon. In fact, this issue, I think, Strange Tales 180. We get the first appearance of Gamora. You know, another Jim Starlin creation. Of course, another well-known Guardians of the Galaxy character these days. Here's Gamora. First appearances by her. The deadliest woman in the galaxy. And by this point in the story, things are getting pretty crazy. You know, a lot of this artwork that's really quite reminiscent of Doctor Strange artwork, you know, that especially this sort of stuff, going through all the, you know, his lines, going through dimensions and things. It really reminds me of Ditko's artwork from Doctor Strange. So, you know, I think there's places where you can see a lot of that inspiration from artists who come before, kind of strongly influencing Starlin's work, and that's by no means a bad thing. I think it's great because he's utilising different styles and his own ideas very well. Also get the introduction of the Magus here, the alternate version of Adam Warlock, the evil Adam Warlock, who here I think, if I remember rightly, the original idea is that he's a version of Adam Warlock from the distant future, where he's turned evil. So here he's confronting his past self, and similarly Warlock is therefore confronting his future self. And the Magus, you know, he came back later on as well. He was utilised as the main antagonist in the Infinity War event, which was the sequel to Infinity Gauntlet. Just looking at some of these panels again, and stuff like this where you say it gets quite experimental, quite cool. There's a section in here, so Thanos is back, of course, and he's formed an uneasy alliance. He's fighting with Warlock at this point, but he's got his own reasons for doing so, his own schemes. Thanos, ever the schemer. He's always got a plan. And then, you know, almost towards the end of the book, really, is when we see the introduction of the Infinity Stones. Nearly said there. That's blasphemous, isn't it? Infinity Gems. Got to use the word gems when you're talking about the comics. But initially they're called the Soul Gems. So it's just 6 Soul Gems. They aren't differentiated into time, reality, space, etc. until later on. But it's a nice introduction to them, to see them come into the fray, and similarly to how Thanos was going to use the Cosmic Cube to achieve supreme power. By this point, it's kind of his second scheme to become almighty. And at this point, he is planning to utilise the 6 gems to do so. Which, of course, is a similar thing to what he ended up doing later with Infinity Gauntlet, but this concept of these 6 Infinity Gems was not fully fleshed out here. I think it's something that Starlin revisited later on and quite consciously elaborated on to make it a stronger concept. But as with many things, it's always cool to go back to the beginning and see where these characters and these concepts and ideas kind of came from. And these are very enjoyable stories in their own right, you know. These have held up really well, I think, overall. There's that cover that was the DM variant for the Omnibus. It's Jim Starlin's cover to Avengers issue 7. And this is when you're building up to another big showdown. And by this time, I think Starlin's artwork is just looking really strong. You know, Thanos at this point is looking a lot more recognisable, resembling, I think, the more familiar, iconic look of the character, very much so at this point. And it's been quite a while since I read this material. I think I read it when I first got the Omnibus, back when it came out. As I say, that's 3 to 4 years ago, I believe. So, overdue for a reread, definitely. I think it might be the case, in fact, today. I'm overdue for a reread of the whole Jim Starlin Infinity stuff. So this, and then Gauntlet, War, Crusade. I might need to go through it all again. Here's the end of the big battle from this time round. So it ends up as a big showdown. Many characters here. You've got Spider-Man, the Avengers, some of the Fantastic Four, the Things there. And Thanos, he ends up being turned to stone. So, you know, quite dramatic. And then this is kind of his last hurrah. You know, that was his defeat. They took him away. And he was literally just a statue in a crypt somewhere on Titan, I think. For about, I want to say about 12 years. And other than the brief appearance he makes in this graphic novel. I'd say spoiler alert for this, but the title really gives it away, doesn't it? It seems redundant. But it's just interesting to think about how long I think Thanos was absent from comics. And how cool it was in a way that it was Jim Starlin who created the character, told all these stories. And then nobody else touched the character. I don't know if that was an agreement between Starlin and Marvel, kind of a, you know, a gentleman's agreement not to touch the character. For whatever reason, though, it was the case that until Starlin came back and revived him, he was just totally absent for many years. Yeah, here he is. This is where the statue of Thanos, well, he is Thanos, he's just a statue now, just gets placed here, kind of plonked on that plinth in this crypt, and gets to stay there for 10 years until he comes back to life. But this is the death of Captain Marvel then, of course, so Marvel's first kind of specifically named graphic novel. And a really iconic story. I think this is a really, really touching story, a really, really well written one. It's how Captain Marvel finds out he is dying, basically, and the way he's dying is that he's dying of cancer. So the whole idea is this kind of, I suppose, in a way, interesting idea that you get a super powerful being capable of doing so much, but in the end, something that neither he nor any of his superpowered allies, friends, can do anything to stop. So he's having to come to terms with this. He kind of goes through different stages of grief for himself, really. There's denial, anger, sadness. As I say, well handled. It's quite a mature subject for this first graphic novel to deal with. But one that I think Starlin did a great job on, and it's definitely a very sad ending. You know, when we do see that moment where Marvel passes away. We've got the scenes here where, you know, you've got a lot of key characters trying to work hard to do whatever they can to save him. Reed Richards, the Beast, Hank McCoy, Doctor Strange. Thor's in there for some reason, not quite sure what he's contributing to the conversation. Really cool artwork though in here as well. Really nice colouring. I like it. But yeah, it is just a very tragic story, and one that Marvel have kind of honoured it to this day, because out of the many characters, superheroes or otherwise, who've died in comics over the years, I think, as we probably all know, the majority of them end up coming back to life sooner or later, or it turns out they never really died in the first place. Marvel is really one of the exceptions, you know. He does officially die in this story. This bit where he dies, quite interesting, because this is where Thanos comes into it, and I guess that's why it's included in this omnibus, really. But it's not, well, it's Thanos, but it's kind of like an afterlife Thanos. You know, Marvel goes to some kind of underworld, has a final conversation and confrontation with Thanos. But in reality has genuinely passed away. And then you get this final page where you get like a little funeral scene, which is really, really touching, really beautiful artwork. And there's a bit of trivia. I feel like this is fairly well known. But just hiding over here behind Wolverine and Eros, you can just about make out that Jim Starlin managed to get Superman in there, managed to sneak in a DC character. You just see his head, and down here you see his boots and a little bit of his cape. pretty sneaky, but very cool. But yeah, so they've honoured it, you know, Marvel stayed dead, basically, one of the characters who hasn't come back to life. So, just goes to show you, I think, the how well regarded that story is overall. A lot of cool artwork in the back here, a lot of original pencils, primarily by Jim Starlin. As I say, the majority of that, the artwork in this omnibus, is by Starlin. But well worth reading, honestly, especially if you're into the cosmic side of Marvel. I mean, if you're not into cosmic Marvel, then I would say this one won't be for you. But if you enjoy cosmic stuff, if you like Thanos as a character, then I feel surely you would enjoy this if you haven't checked it out already. You know, whether you manage to find a copy of this omnibus or read it digitally or however else. It's well worth doing, and it gives you a lot of context to Infinity Gauntlet. If you've maybe read that and not read this before, you'll probably find that a lot of the stuff that happens in there, a lot of the characters first appear here. So you might just kind of have those moments where you go, oh, right, okay, that's where they came in. You know, that's where they came from, etc. But this isn't necessary reading. If you want to go straight into Infinity Gauntlet, you could do so. But, you know, I'm a Thanos fan, so definitely a must for me. One I'm definitely very happy to have in my collection. And as I mentioned, one I need to reread, I think. Because, as is often the case when I flick through these books for these reviews, just find myself remembering how cool certain things are. You know, just kind of like, oh man, yeah, this is really good. A lot of extras though. This is quite a big chunk of extras. That's the pin-up. Jim Starlin pin-up image of Thanos. That's the one that they used on the side of the dust cover on the spine. But yeah, this is probably a a larger chunk of extras than you get in most omnibuses. This is a couple of 100 pages, I think. Near as damn it. Hopefully you've gained a good idea of what the book is like and maybe some reassurance. I mean, I realise this came out years ago, so this has probably been clarified in many other places by now. But yeah, reassurance that if maybe you are taking a look at this book, or just never quite made your mind upon it, that it is in fact a complete collection, at least as far as Thanos goes, for these early stories. You know, from his first appearance to his last appearance up until Silver Surfer 34, many years after this stuff ended. But thanks as always for watching, guys. Let me know what you think about this book, because it's one that I don't see mentioned very often, certainly amongst, you know, different omnibuses. I don't know if it maybe went under the radar at the time, or it's just maybe not as popular as other stuff. Could be. But let me know what you think. Honestly, would be interested to hear your thoughts on this one. And thanks as always for watching. We'll be back again soon to discuss something else.